So I saw the Wolf Mauler Just Write debate the other week, and I think you're all wrong. I'd been following the whole Last Jedi debate for a while now. I'd watched both of Just Wright's videos on the subject and all 100 hours of Mauler's videos. So I was intrigued by the idea of people from both sides of this debate, all of whom I respected, coming together and having a real conversation about it. But the debate wasn't really about The Last Jedi. Rather, it was about the idea of subjectivity versus objectivity, specifically as it relates to film criticism. So that's what I want to talk about today. So throughout this debate, both sides seem to acknowledge that there's both an objective and a subjective way to look at film. However, each side seems to sort of belittle the other. Just Wright seems to feel that looking at films objectively is not really a very valuable form of criticism.
Like the kind of perspective you're advocating for would just make for really boring art.
Mauler and Wolf, on the other hand, seem to feel that you can assess a film's quality completely objectively, and that subjective judgments should not enter into the equation at all.
We're talking about the things that actually happen and what they're worth, within the film, with no other interpretation. This is literally just how things work versus how you feel about them. We don't care about how we feel about these things. We're talking about what they are and what they do.
So let me break down Just Wright's side first, because I think it's the easier one to approach. Now, for the sake of fairness, I'm going to look at a film that me and my brother actually made a long, long time ago. Just to give some context, this is our remake, or I guess you'd call it a reboot, of the 1960s television series Combat, which we grew up watching. It's worth checking out if you have any interest. Directors like Richard Donner and Robert Altman did some episodes.
Hey, little John. Yeah? Well, see these new boots I got? Aren't they really nice? Aren't they really nice? I mean, I just got them. They're just plain lace-up boots. I mean, not like any kind of buckle or anything. They're just like back home.
Billy, I have the same boots.
Oh, dog.
Bear with me, this gets a little long.
Hey, little John. Well, I gotta talk to you about something. Hey!
Hey, soldier, what's with that netting?
Camouflage kicked into the wall.
Okay, Lieutenant, do you know where your carbine is? No, Saunders, I don't. You don't?
Now, I think this film is objectively bad. I mean, the cinematography is awful, the dialogue is somehow even worse, there's basically zero production value, and the worst part is that there's really no clearly defined story, plot, or characters. It's just kind of a rather disconnected sequence of events. Who are these characters? What is their motivation? What is even going on? We knew these things in our heads, but we didn't seem to understand that you had to, communicate them to the audience, whether through visuals or through dialogue.
Better call my company. This is Black Sheep up to check commit 5 over. What do you want here? Well, there's a lieutenant, a sergeant, and a sniper, and a private, and guess that does it. Just plain lace-up boots, not like any buckle or anything.
Now, to be fair, this is a really extreme example. I mean, I'm not even sure if this qualifies as a film. We have since grown as filmmakers. I think part of the reason for this is they're watching stuff like the Red Letter Media prequel reviews. Seeing Mr. Plinkett dissect and deconstruct the prequels taught us a lot about filmmaking and what makes a film work or not work.
The excitement and the passion that thousands of computer animators have for getting paychecks.
This is called constructive criticism, and I think it's really vital. Part of the purpose of film criticism and any kind of artistic criticism is to help artists grow and improve their craft based on people's feedback. Now, I think this kind of criticism is not only valid, but incredibly valuable. If someone had told us this at the time, we might have actually grown and made better films. Instead, we continued to make films that were really, really awful. I think that looking at a film's deeper meaning through one's interpretive lens can be really valuable. But some films are simply incompetent, and I think that pointing that out is also needed, and even vital. Mauler and Dishonoured Wolf's videos on The Last Jedi aren't really concerned with interpretive lenses or deeper meaning. They're simply arguing, like Just Write's videos on The Hobbit or Suicide Squad, that the film's writing and filmmaking is incompetent. So now I'm going to address the other side of this argument. So as an example, let's look at the film Finding Dory. This is a film that I think is fine. I don't really think that there are a lot of objective flaws I could point to that make this film not great. Mauler's hypothetical robot would probably give this movie a 9 or a 10, but I don't really think I would give it more than a 7. Does this mean I'm wrong? There aren't really a lot of concrete flaws in Finding Dory that stick out. It's more just inoffensively bland. I think that Just Write hints at this when he talks about The Force Awakens not being very interesting. There's simply not a lot of substance there. Now, The Force Awakens is also a very flawed film, which is why I'm pointing to Finding Dory. So let's look at another more nuanced example. Michael Mann's Last of the Mohicans. The ending of this film, I think, is pretty objectively flawed. There's a scene where a character named Alice kills herself rather than submit to the villain, Magui. Now, the protagonist, Hawkeye, and his father show up and kill Magui a few minutes later. So the whole thing feels a bit unnecessary, and it's kind of hard to understand why she does this. I think part of Alice's motivation here is that she just saw Hawkeye's brother, Uncas, get murdered. It's hinted throughout the film that her and Uncas have feelings for each other. However, this is not very well developed, so this scene isn't really earned. I make the same argument in my own review for the film on my blog. To quote that review, "There's nothing in this story that makes this situation urgent, yet somehow the scene always feels urgent. It works for me emotionally, even if, intellectually, I know it shouldn't. If that doesn't speak for Mann's talent as a filmmaker, I don't know what does." So what I'm saying here is that I think in this scene, the good cinematography and editing overcome the weak writing, and the scene works despite being flawed. This is ultimately a somewhat subjective call. Someone else might argue that the weak writing destroys the good cinematography and editing, and that the scene doesn't work. I think that both of these approaches are completely valid. As the debate goes on, it starts to divulge into a sort of argument about logic versus emotion.
I'm just saying, like, you should be more concerned with creating art that is emotionally resonant than something that is, like, intellectually satisfying.
So this is why the robot is important, though. If you don't agree with everything from the robot, for example, he says, this is issues, this is this, these are all issues, and you go, none of them bother me. You'd be like, well, that's fantastic for you, but the robots just explain why it doesn't work for so many other people. And until you fix those problems, which you can, I think I heard you say earlier that, like, art that would satisfy the robot probably wouldn't be very satisfying or something like that. Is that, to me, that's utter nonsense.
Subjectivity has a lot to do with a film's emotional resonance. Now, in the end, I think we're all essentially essayists. One of the first things I learned about basic essay writing is that you need to be able to balance logic with emotion, or what Aristotle would call logos and pathos. I think a good movie is very much like a good essay. It needs to have that balance of logic and emotion, of logos and pathos. So I think the best films are ones that are both logical and emotionally resonant. Films that make sense and are coherent and consistent, but also have a certain degree of passion behind them. There are a lot of critics who are really good at breaking down the more technical aspects of screenwriting. One of my favorites, and someone who I think is criminally underrated, is Captain Logan on Geekvolution. He does a series of reviews called Superhero Rewind on superhero movies that I think are definitely worth checking out if you like this kind of deconstruction. On the other hand, I think that YouTube's video essay community have put out a lot of really great videos about the passion, or lack thereof, in a lot of modern Hollywood films. Perhaps the best example being The Nerd Writer, particularly his videos on intertextuality and the epidemic of passable Hollywood movies. But I think it's also possible to look at film through both lenses, subjective and objective. I think some of YouTube's best critics, like Ralph Seppi or Red Letter Media, do this really well. In summary, I think it's really healthy and good to have these kind of debates. I think it's important for us as critics to really examine how and why we look at films the way we do. What is the purpose of our criticism? What value does it have? How does it shape the way people make and view movies? I'd also like to address Dishonoured Wolf's argument that Force Ghost could have stopped Order 66. As is hinted at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and clearly established in the last 3 episodes of Clone Wars Season 6, Force Ghosts were not around until Qui-Gon Jinn discovered this after his death. He passed his secret on to Yoda, who then kept it a secret himself until deciding to reveal it to Obi-Wan at the end of Revenge of the Sith after Order 66. So actually, during Order 66, the only Force Ghosts around were Qui-Gon Jinn. While we're on the subject, I'd also like to address this whole deal with the Eagles in Lord of the Rings, which I've always thought is totally